Hi, my name is Victoria, and I'm a speech-language pathology graduate student at the University of Memphis. And this is my presentation on augmentative and alternative communication for law enforcement. I'm going to be specifically talking about communicating with nonverbal communicators. To give you an idea of the direction of this presentation, here's a brief outline. First, I'm going to go into my goals and purpose. Then I'm going to go into the who, what, when, and why of augmentative and alternative communication. I'm going to delve into law enforcement's role and AAC. I'm going to propose a law enforcement communication strip. And finally, I'm going to give you all scenarios to consider that involve AAC users. In general, my goal is to expose law enforcement officers to AAC by giving a brief overview of augmentative and alternative communication. I'm going to stress the importance of law enforcement officers' understanding of nonverbal communicators and give you all some tips on how to interact to increase your comfort and the comfort of the AAC user. Finally, I'm going to present a communication strip and proper steps to using it with an AAC user. So why is all of this important? Well, the AAC Institute reports that 3.5 million people use AAC, and those with disabilities are targeted at a higher rate than able-bodied individuals to be the victims of crime. So those who use AAC are therefore 2 times more likely to experience violent victimization in their lifetime. Further, I conducted a brief survey prior to creating this presentation, which revealed that 80% of law enforcement officers have not heard of augmentative and alternative communication or do not know how to interact with AAC users. But in general, there seems to be a lack of community awareness of AAC and its users. So these are the WH questions of AAC. What is AAC? Who uses it? When do they use it? And why do they use it? And these are all the questions I will address to build the framework for applying skills within the law enforcement role. Augmentative and alternative communication is a supplemental or replacement for natural speech through the use of electronic devices, manual communication boards, or gestural communications such as American Sign Language. AAC is broken down into 2 larger categories, aided and unaided. Aided AAC is anything that involves the person plus another object or thing. So pen and paper, speech-generating devices, or picture boards are all examples of aided AAC. Unaided are those that just involve the person. So those are gestures, body language, and sign language. The person does not need an additional tool in order to communicate. They can use their body to communicate. AAC can be used as a temporary or permanent form of communication. Young children with language delays may use it to spur their language or be a starting point for language. And adults who've had total laryngectomies or removal of the vocal folds, or voice box as you might know it, may use AAC as an alternative form of communication until they learn to use their electrolarynx, which is a device that creates vibrations within the head and within the mouth and neck in order to create speech-like sounds. So here are a few examples of aided AAC. On the top, you have various devices with a dedicated program that an AAC user can use to communicate. So the smallest being the phone that has a very basic 4-symbol board. And then all the way to the right, you see the large tablet that has a very detailed board. And these devices can be used to create any sentence. It can be grammatically correct. It can involve emotions. Anything that you can say as a verbal communicator can be said with a device. On the bottom left is a switch user. So they use the switch, which is the blue button that you see to her right, the left of her head in the picture. And she uses that to switch through her electronic device, and she can make selections by hitting the button. And finally, the bottom right is the picture exchange communication system. And this book is used by the child, and they can use the photos to create sentences. So they'll take the image out of the book, put it on the yellow strip, and then hand the yellow strip to their communication partner. So, for example, in this photo, he has I want and toys. So, after he's created his sentence, he would rip off the yellow Velcro strip, hand it to his communication partner, and his communication partner would know that he would like to play with his toys. So, who uses AAC? Anyone who cannot communicate verbally, either because of anatomical, social, motoric, or cognitive limitations, can be an AAC user. So this means that all ages, ethnicities, genders, etc., can be an augmentative or alternative communication user. It is necessary for those with severe expressive communication delays or those who are unable to verbally communicate. A variety of diagnoses or disabilities could benefit from an alternative form of communication. Some examples of these are autism, ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and various types of aphasia. Most users use their AAC device all the time. Adults or experienced users can use a combination of communication modalities to express their ideas fully. So they may use their device and then also use facial expressions to fully portray their feelings about a situation. They may also use AAC when they're not being understood fully. So someone with a traumatic brain injury or a stroke may have severely slurred speech. So for an unfamiliar listener, it may be hard for them to get the full message, so the AAC user can use their device to communicate in that specific situation to make communication easier and more fluid. It's important to note that those with autism may be verbal, meaning they have the structures to create vocalizations and produce sound, but may need their device to speak in certain situations due to social anxieties or discomfort with vocalizing in particular environments. So, why would someone use AAC? Well, it's their way to communicate if they're unable to communicate verbally. Imagine not being able to tell your loved one how you feel or tell your doctor about your symptoms. AAC users is how nonverbal people AAC is how nonverbal people communicate with others. Again, AAC may be used due to cognitive, motoric, or anatomical limitations. Now, with your knowledge of AAC, I'd like to delve into how this population relates to your work as a law enforcement officer. Being aware of those in your community and their needs helps you better serve them. It is important that you protect the rights of AAC users and serve their needs appropriately. This means being aware of their needs, understanding their communication style, and respecting their form of communication. By knowing how to serve them, you're assuring them that their presence in the community is there and that you respect it, and the importance of their safety and their happiness is just as important as verbal communicators. And you also acknowledge that you wish to be involved in advocating for them. So the picture on the left is an example of how groups have begun to advocate for this population. The card is created by Larry's Speakeasy, which is an organization that works with total laryngectomy patients. So again, this is the population that no longer has the ability to create sound due to their lack of vocal folds. This orange piece is placed right on the inside of the car on the dashboard so that when the law enforcement officer approaches the vehicle, they can see the card, read it, and understand the situation and communicate appropriately. So your role also involves being a good communicator. Just like there are typical things that are done when verbally communicating, there are things that you can do to make an augmentative communicator more comfortable as well. First, acknowledge that for your specific situation, once you've identified them as an AAC user, they are not resisting, they just do not communicate like you or I. It might take them a little bit of time to respond or to find the proper response on their device. Establishing a reliable yes and no is extremely important, and I'm going to be going into more detail about this on the next slide. Like I said, give them time to respond. It might take them a while to locate all of the words on their device or type out their response. Note that writing is not always a viable option. Some AAC users may be too young to read or write, or lack the literacy skills or motoric abilities to communicate by writing a message back or reading your message. For many AAC users, speaking slowly or simplistically is not necessary. Speak to them like you would your friend, your spouse, your colleague, or any other verbal communicator. Finally, after they communicate, verify that the information you've received is correct. Misunderstandings happen, especially when communicating with someone who does not communicate like you do. And as you know, getting the information correct, especially in an emergency situation, is very important. So take the time to make sure you've recorded their proper response. So here are a few ways to establish the yes and no that I was talking about on the previous slide. This is the most basic way to gather information from a nonverbal communicator, understanding that this is all dependent on their cognitive abilities. So get creative and take time to evaluate the motoric abilities as well as the cognitive abilities of the person with which you are communicating. If they do not have their device or you are not familiar with their form of communication, such as American Sign Language, establishing a yes or no is even more important. It gives you the ability to gather information in a reliable way and ensure that the person's safety is properly respected and that they are in a comfortable environment. Physically, you can elicit a yes or no by the common head shake up or down, also with an eye blink, and it's important to make it a double blink versus a long blink, as to not get confused with the habitual blinking that happens periodically. There's also lip movement if the eye blink is not working, so pursing the lips or stretching the lips into a smile. And then you can also look left and right. So looking left would be yes, and looking right would be no. Finally, using a communication board can greatly aid in not only gathering an accurate yes and no, but also helping the person communicate other wants and needs. And this leads perfectly into my proposed law enforcement communication strip, which can be abbreviated just to LEX. This communication strip and more detailed communication boards are low-tech ways to communicate with nonverbal communicators. They're a great resource to use with nonverbal children and stroke victims in a hospital. However, I've adapted a compact communication strip that can be used by law enforcement officers in a variety of situations. Notice the yes and no on either side of the board with clearly defined colors to make gathering a reliable yes and no possible. Additionally, I've added a few phrases that may be useful. I actually worked with a few AAC users to come up with this board, and we brainstormed different things that they might need to communicate with a police officer in a variety of situations. In addition to the yes and no, directly below them are other options that might be used in certain situations. So they have the ability to say, I'm not sure, I don't know. And then they're also able to say, it's something else. And then in the middle, you do have 8 other symbols that can help them communicate specific things. So for some people, they may need to indicate that they need their support person. They may be able to say, follow me, I can direct you. And then the I need my device and give me pen and paper were added to ensure that if the communicator is able to use an easier and more understandable form of communication, they have the ability to ask for it. I'd suggest printing out this strip in color and laminating it, then you can fold it as you need to fit into any uniform pocket. This is lightweight, it's portable, and it can be the difference in making sure that an AAC user feels understood and ensure their safety. I'll be sure to link this communication strip in the description box below so that you can print it off and use it. Now with your understanding of AAC and ability to apply it, I would like to go over a few scenarios that you might encounter in the law enforcement role. Though I won't go into detail about each scenario, I will give you time to pause the video before pointing out a few things that you need to consider when making a decision about each of these scenarios. Be aware that there could be multiple ways to properly handle each situation. The first is a basic welfare check. Pause the video now to discuss what you would do. The important thing to note is that he is an independent adult. Calling his mother would be inappropriate. Just because he's autistic and nonverbal does not mean you should not treat him as an adult and ask him questions as so. This could be a great time to pull out your communication strip. If not, establishing a yes and no protocol would also be helpful for determining if he's safe. The second situation is a domestic dispute. Read over the situation and pause now and then discuss. It is important to note that she is only 4 years old. Writing things down would not be an option due to her lack of literacy skills. The communication strip may be useful, but she might not have ever used a communication device before, and the symbols may vary from board to board. So there's no way of telling that she'd be able to look at the image on the board and know that she would be understanding what they would mean. So calling for assistance to communicate with her would be the best way to get the full story. And though I'm not totally familiar with all police protocol, I'm not sure a yes and a no response would yield enough information to ensure her safety. Don't be afraid to reach out and call other professionals when communicating with people who do not speak your own language. The final scenario is a car accident caused by a medical emergency. Pause the video to discuss. Under the assumption that this is this man's first stroke, he wouldn't be familiar with the communication strip. However, this does not mean he can't use it. After determining that his left arm is mobile, because as you can tell in the scenario, his right arm is no longer mobile. So if he can move his left, he'll be able to point. So you could model how to use the strip by asking him a question and then giving him a trial response by pointing to the symbol. So for example, a very basic question would be, are you all right? And then you could model yes or no. And as you say yes, point to the yes square. And as you say no, point to the no square. This would help him understand, okay, I can point to these boxes to tell him or her what I am feeling, my response, etc. Also, establishing a yes and no protocol may be appropriate for the situation until he's had a full medical workup. So though we didn't cover all the possible scenarios, I hope these 3 allowed you to gauge how you would respond. If you wish to learn more, here are a few more organizations for you to explore. AAC is complex and a far-reaching topic, and even as a speech-language pathology student, specifically with an AAC certificate, I've only begun to scratch the surface. I encourage you to continue your research into this topic by exploring a few more groups and institutions that do a phenomenal job covering a variety of topics relating to AAC. If you have any questions or comments about the presentation, feel free to email me. I'd love to hear about your experience with this presentation. Thank you so much for your time, and also feel free to share.